You know, Colin Powell died, if you can believe it. You might have noticed if you've been anywhere near social media for the past 8 to 10 hours. For the past, I don't know what time is. Yeah. And I thought it'd be cool. Who's he? I guess a lot of you really wouldn't know, would you? That's just really funny to think about, you know? Not that I'm really in a position to make fun of you guys, because when I heard he died, I did have to refresh my knowledge on him a little bit. You know, it's been a while since he's been fully politically relevant, but he was the Secretary of State who justified our invasion of Iraq. He was the person essentially who facilitated our invasion of Iraq. Yeah, he was the person who presented the argument and sort of tried to lead the push for that to happen, you know. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit, just real brief, you know. If you want to see people making fun of him for being a war criminal, you can just go on Twitter and find every lefty doing it, including myself. You know, so we can. I mean, I could dance for 10 minutes if you want, but I actually think there's a really interesting kind of secondary issue here, right? Like a more important, maybe kind of side thing, right? So the thing that I don't think a lot of you guys know is that as people affiliated with the Republican Party go, Colin Powell was virtually as good as you're going to get with regards to apparent ideological positions. So, for instance, he said that the neocons in the Bush administration were fucking insane. He tried to push for better rights for gay people in the military. He's pro-choice. He left the Republican Party in 2001 after the January 6th Capitol riot because he thought that the party had completely lost its way. Um, there was a lot of stuff like that. I think he actually, in terms of, oh, sorry, 2021, not 2001. Sorry, yeah, 2021, not the secret other Capitol riot. No. No, and initially, by the way, he did not want to invade Iraq. He actually argued against it to George Bush. He argued evidently for hours, trying to dissuade him from that position, and was successful in arguing George Bush to, at the very least, make it an international move. You know, now as the Secretary of State, Colin Powell can't directly end or stop war. You know, at the end of the day, the president has you know, a good bit of sway when it comes to that. And you know, in theory, Congress is supposed to sign off on all declarations of war, but we know how easy it is to get around that. He was one of the few people who responded to Obama's a secret Muslim with the correct take, which is, so what if he's a Muslim? As far as I can tell, Colin Powell was a fairly progressive guy by the standards of Republicans for his time, maybe even better than how I'm describing right now. So did Powell redeem himself in the end? Well, hold on. We're not talking about redemption here, because everything that I'm talking about right now is pretty cool, kind of relative to the standards that you would expect for somebody in his position. But he also was the one who justified the Iraq War. This is what happened. He was also the guy who hid the My Lai massacre from Vietnam from Congress. Yes. He was also he entered that unit after the massacre had taken place and was part of its whitewashing afterwards. Let me tell you what happened. Okay, Colin Powell, were it not for a couple of things in his career, would probably be remembered alongside some of the most principled membered of the Republican Party, most principled members of the Republican Party around the turn of the millennium. But there's a problem, okay? And it's he engaged in a type of behavior that we, as a civilization, we agreed was unacceptable around the time of the Nuremberg trials. Do you know what it is? It's an excuse that a lot of Nazi officers deployed to forestall their executions, just following orders. Colin Powell did not want to invade Iraq. But when he talked with George Bush, this is what he said: "We should not do this, but if you decide to, I'm with you all the way." Colin Powell thought it was ultimately the job of the president to make that decision, and that his job was to step out of the way and follow orders, even if he disagreed with the morals of those orders. And that's really it, isn't it? Colin Powell, at the time and in the time since, has never been this uh, massive ideological advocate for the Iraq War. But when it became clear that his president was unrelenting in his desire to invade Iraq, Colin Powell stepped aside and not only allowed it to happen, he argued for it to happen, providing faulty information to the United Nations in an effort to justify an international response. He became the propagandist for the Iraq War. As a Secretary of State, the responsibility fell upon him, and oh yeah, knowingly, he knew this information was fucked. He did, and it went against his morals, but he did it anyway. This is not just following orders. This is becoming the cheerleader for the death of hundreds of thousands, of millions, because you think that it's your job to, if your superior orders you to fulfill that role. So I don't think the problem with Colin Powell was that he was an evil person. I think it's that he was, if not indifferent to evil, at the very least he felt that the right to enact evil superseded his moral obligation to prevent it. It's not about whether or not he wanted bad things to happen. It's about whether or not he felt he had a higher responsibility. But, in modern militaries, I'm very sorry. I don't. You have a strong opinion on Colin Powell? Do you know? The issue is we kind of agreed this during the Nuremberg trials. And guys, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but in Germany, is it not the case that soldiers are required to disobey orders from their superiors if it is in violation of a higher degree of moral of moral need? Like if they're ordering you to do something which is a war crime or grievously, the American military teaches that now to its own members. Well, that's nice. It's a good philosophy because it is true that militaries and political systems don't function very well unless you have some kind of chain of command. I mean, that's how pretty much all organizations ever work, even if they're democratic, that just seems to be how they function. But there needs to be some kind of overriding moral obligation, something that transcends the limits of that organizational structure and gives you the power to stand up and say no or to resign. And if Colin Powell, I want to be clear, if Colin Powell had resigned, he would probably be remembered as a hero. Even if George Bush had gone on with the Iraq War, if the Secretary of State had said no and had resigned and said publicly, George Bush is gunning for this war against my best wishes, this is a bad decision for the American people, I would respect the shit out of him. Even though he was a Republican at the time, I would have. Absolutely. Because that takes huge balls. But he didn't do that. And instantaneously, he went from being, again, not a perfect guy by any means, but a fairly principled political leader to a war criminal. And sometimes that really is the best you can do. Sometimes when you're in a position of power, the best thing that you can do is not be that war criminal. I know that he was involved in whitewashing elements of the My Lai massacre. I don't know as much about that as I do the Iraq War because, of course, I wasn't around back then. I am in no way, shape, or form am I meaning to suggest here that he would have been a perfect person regardless of that. But if we're to isolate this Iraq War incident, that would have been the big difference, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be best if he had stayed rather than someone else? Or something. If he had not been the facilitator of that invasion, if he had not been the conduit through which the American government was allowed to murder so many people, whether he resigned or whether he stood up there and said that he would do nothing, he would lend no support to that project, but he didn't just do that. He didn't just allow it to happen. He signed up, got on board, and became the mouthpiece of the Bush administration, going so far as to lie to the rest of the world to try to bring them in on it as well. You understand? I think it's deeply sad in a way, because I think, and I'm guessing here, but I'm willing to bet that Colin Powell probably has some kind of strong internal moral compass of some kind. If he's willing to leave the Republican Party after the January 6th attack on the Capitol, he's clearly got something ticking inside of him. But whatever compass that was, whatever function he had, was not operative or superseded by something higher in those pivotal moments. And sometimes that really is all it takes to define a person's entire life. What moral obligation does someone like him have? I don't really deal that much in the moral obligation as a philosophical concept, but if we're talking about are you in a position to facilitate what is functionally like like practically a genocide in terms of its death toll? You should probably not do that. Whatever obligations we have to not do bad things, that's about as high up as you can get in terms of things you should not do. You know, that's that is just about this is literally the highest tier of bad thing you can do, basically. And he not only allowed it to happen, but became an advocate for it because he was told to. But if you want to frame that as we have a moral obligation to not enable like war crimes, then yeah, say that. I'd say that was pretty. I'd say that's pretty good. Anyway, make fun of him after his death all you want. You are absolutely free to, because he tainted his legacy so irreparably with that behavior that even if he has a even if it was something he later admitted was a mistake or later clearly stated like that he wasn't happy with, which he did, it doesn't change the fact that he did it. You know? Yeah, Dennis Prager also has COVID right now. Apparently, he deliberately got COVID, so we'll see if lightning can strike twice, and you know, we'll see if whether or not COVID is following through on its moral obligation to at least do some good while it's here. Okay.